Dude, one thing I wanted to kind of brag on real quick is just how awesome our listeners are.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes they make self-sacrifices. And one in particular, Julie out in Texas, her and her husband did something super daring.
Ooh.
And that is they watched the new Cats movie.
Oh, God. That is daring.
And they confirmed it is, in fact, terrible.
Well, I thought you were going to say terrifying because...
Oh, and terrifyingly terrible, I should say.
It really does legitimately look scary to me.
Well, I mean, it doesn't look scary to me necessarily, but it's definitely weird. And like the fact that they released it without like finishing, you know, all the CGI, and there's just a bunch of weird stuff. I don't know. I feel like I still have to see it though, just to kind of experience how bad it is.
I don't mean scary in the sense of like, oh, it's like a horror movie scary. I mean like the way they look, like the character design, and maybe it is that they left, you know, CGI off or something, but my God, it's
crazy too, because it's like the cast is pretty unbelievable. The other day, speaking of listeners, I was kind of having a conversation with Clay, one of the original
one of the OGs
listeners of the podcast, and we were talking music and stuff, and we were talking about how amazing it would have been to, and I know I just went from Cats, it just got me thinking about music, and then this kind of reminded me, so that's where my train of thought is, but how amazing would it have been to have witnessed the early, like one of the first shows of bands like Devo or Talking Heads. You know what I mean? Like, because of course everyone knows Devo. When they think of Devo, they think of like the crazy sort of like red, like the helmets, you know, and everybody's dressed the same. When they think of the Talking Heads, I'm not sure what they think of.
Well, I mean, definitely David Byrne.
Yeah, and like the way he sings, and like just as an example, the song "Psycho Killer," right?
Yeah.
Imagine, I sometimes just kind of imagine myself just being a music fan. I'm in a poorly lit bar, some hole in the wall little place where there's only like room for 150 people, and then seeing him commit to that song and singing it and just being just blown away, man. You know?
Yeah.
Speaking of good songs, why don't you slap that intro button, son?
Boom. Hey, boys and girls, welcome back to That Would Be Rad, the podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bence, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
What are we talking about today, man?
Man, I can't get off this music topic.
Oh,
you
yeah,
know,
me
like
too, man.
music has been such a humongous part of our lives ever since we were kids making mixtapes. I know that's probably true for you too, right? I mean,
we went from making mixtapes to making albums.
Yeah, our own albums, right?
Yeah.
There's just so much about music and bands and rock and roll and stuff that is super intriguing. And the other day I started like kind of getting into and being reminded of all the crazy sort of conspiracy theories that surround rock and roll. I mean, there's just so many is the thing.
Yeah.
You know, I think one of the first ones I ever sort of learned about was, of course, the Paul McCartney being killed in a car accident, and then the Beatles replacing him with a, like a
double.
I don't know, like a stand-in, a lookalike.
Which we're absolutely doing a full episode on that, like on the Paul is Dead. There's a documentary.
It's crazy, man. Oh.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say that, you know, growing up, the Beatles were one of my favorite bands. And when I heard that, it is weird, you know?
Yeah. Well,
that conspiracy.
I mean, man, there's some great documentaries out on YouTube. I think there's one that's like, I don't know, I think it's like 3 hours long or something. But, and I may be confusing this, but I think it's called like The Winged Beetle or something. But it's kind of like a slideshow type thing. I mean, clearly somebody, you know, it's probably like a homemade type thing. But man, the amount of information is pretty amazing. I mean, you know, down to like how his like earlobes looked. And the thing is like, not to get totally into this, because again, I want to do a full episode, but basically what we're talking about, if you've never heard about this, apparently in the 60s, early Beatlemania had hit, the Beatles were beloved, you know, and then apparently Paul McCartney the real Paul McCartney died in a car crash, and they, instead of like breaking up the band and stopping the momentum, they ended up finding a guy that had won a Paul McCartney lookalike contest, who actually turned out to be actually a better singer than Paul McCartney, and what we can gather, an even better songwriter. So, and apparently there were a lot of things between John Lennon kind of being resentful about it all these years, and even Ringo came out several years ago and made some comments about it, and it's wild.
Yeah, we'll have to dive into that one just separately, because there's a lot of details. I remember seeing one when I was in high school where it talked about they did some sort of like vocal analysis and compared.
I don't think I've heard that.
The early one to the later one, and there's, I don't know, there's just all kinds of stuff. I don't know if I believe that one, but anyway, so
I do, man.
Of course you do. I have kind of found a couple others that I had either kind of heard of before or just had never heard before. Obviously there's conspiracies surrounding Kurt Cobain's death.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I don't want to get into that yet. There were a bunch of sort of, what's it called? Like urban legends too that surrounded some musicians in the 90s. Like, do you remember there were some nasty ones that surrounded Alanis Morissette?
Oh, well, those are actually true.
I don't know which one you're talking about. I don't really want to say the one I'm talking about on the air, because it's not.
Well, I'm talking about the one where You Ought to Know, because I went through a phase where I was a huge Jagged Little Pill. I was obsessed with. It was amazing, and I really liked Glenn Ballard, the guy who produced it. Yeah, that song that. Oh, and actually, another side note: Taylor Hawkins played drums for her.
Yeah, that's the only reason. That's the only thing I liked about Alanis Morissette was Taylor Hawkins.
Well, she was amazing. I thought. Dude, you're crazy.
I never liked her, man.
Uninvited was cool. But anyway, that song.
She doesn't talk like that. Why does she sing like that, man? Hate it.
She's
Go
Canadian.
ahead.
It's just, you know how they are.
That's not.
But she canceled. She, her main song, You Ought to Know, which was sort of like very like vengeful and full of vitriol, and was written about Dave Coulier, the guy from Full House. Yeah, so
that wasn't what I was talking. I was talking like real bizarre stuff.
What are you talking about?
Dude, I heard this. Nah, man, I can't say it on the podcast.
No, just get into it, man.
No. It's gross and like.
Well, I mean, we can cut it, but like.
Yeah, I'll cut it out. But anyways, it is the grossest thing ever. There was like this urban legend, or at least like a rumor around my school, that Alanis Morissette had to cancel some tour or something because she had to get her stomach pumped from.
That's kind of like the Marilyn Manson one where.
Just disgusting. Anyway, awesome. Okay. Now, here's one. This one is more of like all-encompassing, and I know you've heard of this, and I'm sure our listeners have too.
By the way, I have no idea where you're going, so
I know.
I'm excited.
You've been busy, and I got to tell you, listeners, if you're already excited that Tyler's back after just one guest appearance or a guest host show, I think he felt the heat of how well Woodrow did.
Oh, I 100. That is the only reason.
He's got you in the sights, man. He's trying to take over your job.
I mean, I was like, this kid is really doing great. And then he took my tagline at the end.
I mean, golly, man.
That's the only reason I'm here, because I was like, I can't let that
I got to
happen.
do something. I got to draw faster. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I'm drawing right now, actually.
Yeah, well, just make sure you get those lines nice and tight. All right. So I'm sure people have heard of this one. I know you have, because we've actually talked about this before. And that's The Curse of the 27 Club.
Yep.
Now, if you haven't heard of this, basically it kind of goes like this. Here it is in short. Humongous music legends. I mean, people that for as long as we're able to talk about music as human beings, after they have lived, people are going to be talking about these people. Robert Johnson, Jimi Hendrix, Brian Jones, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Kurt Cobain, and Amy Winehouse. What do they all have in common?
They died at 27.
Yeah, dude, at the age of 27. So, I mean, obviously, when there's that many, It's real hard to think of it as a coincidence.
Wait a minute. Did Robert Johnson died at 27?
Yeah,
I didn't know that. I know his big.
Yeah, we'll get to that one later.
Okay. But I didn't know that he died at 20. I thought he was like an older dude, but wow.
That's where the term 27 Club kind of comes in. Now, if you ask me, do I think there was some sort of deal that was made, kind of like what we'll get into with Robert Johnson, and at 27, somebody's coming to collect? Or do I think these folks sort of just grew so rapidly in popularity that ultimately they were sort of their own demise? I mean, I think there is something to comedians, musicians, even actors, where the more sort of not inner turmoil that they have, sometimes the things that they create, just the stories that they tell, I should say, are just that much more powerful. And I think because of fame and all of that, coupled with their own sort of depression or anything that they're dealing with, addiction, all this, they just kind of, because they have more access to everything, they kind of just go off the deep end.
But it's, I think we should say that all those in the 27 Club that died at 27, not necessarily, they didn't all die from like suicide or
right.
You know what I mean? So it's not like well, I'm 27, time to kick on off this mortal coil. Yeah. There's a quote too from maybe Jimmy Page or Robert Plant or something, basically that after 27, you're as a musician, as a part of the zeitgeist or pop culture, you don't really have anything else to offer as far as like being in a band and being like a lyricist. It's like it's like that's like the height of your, how do I explain? Like that youthful kind of energy. After that, you kind of settle into being an adult, and which I don't really know. I don't know if maybe the concept of the 27 Club was because of that statement. Like it's like, well, they've sort of accomplished what they needed to accomplish, and then off they go.
Well, it's interesting too, because if you think about all of your favorite bands, after maybe a decade's worth of albums, they start to...
That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they start to get like bored with their sound, and so they evolve a little bit, and sometimes that works in their favor, sometimes it doesn't really.
Yeah.
The one good thing the Beatles kind of had going for them is, if you really look at their album releases, all the albums that they released were really done over the span of like 9 years.
Which is wild.
Yeah, I know. So they kind of like pulled a Seinfeld and just kind of stopped and went their own way.
Yeah.
And because of that, they sort of individually evolved a little bit, but you can still kind of go back and enjoy those Beatles records without fear of it just being like, ooh, I mean, yes, sure. The Rolling Stones are still kicking it. I have my own theories on that being that they're just like robots or something. But,
well,
truth be told, like they may write one really killer song per album that they're releasing. That kind of thing,
definitely. And I think there's also a strong possibility that Keith Richards could possibly be the Count of Saint Germain.
And that's not necessarily on the list, but kind of it is. So let's just keep rolling.
Oh man!
So let's talk about Jim Morrison real quick. Right, coming right off of the 27 Club, he is a quote unquote member of the 27 Club, because on July 3rd, 1971, allegedly, his partner Pamela Corson found him dead in the bathtub of her Paris apartment.
Yep.
Some eyewitnesses kind of speculate that he died from a heroin overdose. This is interesting. There's no autopsy report that was done.
Nope.
So the official cause of death was quote unquote heart failure. Now,
well, and there's no technical. I mean, this is kind of the same as no autopsy, but there's no like coroner's report either. I don't think.
Right. According to, so this is where it starts to get a little crazy. According to English singer Marianne Faithfull, Morrison was killed by her then boyfriend, who was a drug dealer named Jean de Breteuil. Please forgive my French. And then other people have just said that, he died somewhere like in a nightclub and then was moved to the bathtub so that the establishment where he was, the nightclub, could avoid like legal responsibility. Apparently, even Doors keyboardist Ray Manzarek got into kind of talking about that Morrison maybe never died at all.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
And there have been reports that he was seen in, different American cities all around the world, Australia, Tibet, kind of just like really diving into that sort of Lizard King mystique and life. I mean, what do you think about that? I mean,
well, I'm a huge Jim Morrison fan. I love the Doors. I read a book years ago from the drummer, and for some odd reason I cannot think of his name at the moment, but it was really great and like really a cool sort of view at. It was an interesting way at looking at Morrison. Instead of looking at him as like a front man, it was a way that you're sort of able to see him as like the band leader, from like the drummer's standpoint. And yeah, he was a really interesting guy because and I mean, this, I could spin off into a lot of stuff with this, but he started off, he kind of went from zero to full on like rock and roll icon. A lot of people say that he had like an eating disorder. Others say that it was just the drugs and he just kind of stopped eating because he was like really, super skinny and sort of emaciated at times. But there was never, he kind of did like a Robert Johnson thing where it's like the people that knew him and the people that were around him said that he kind of disappeared for a short time and then he kind of showed back up and everything was like kind of set up and he was
the drummer did?
No. I'm just saying, like, as far as like just Jim Morrison in general.
Oh,
like,
okay.
He kind of disappeared for, I don't know how long it was, maybe several months or something, but then kind of came back like Robert Johnson did, and he had a whole new sort of icon persona, frontman of like a legendary rock band kind of thing, and a lot of people sort of have wondered or sort of alleged that possibly, again, this could kind of go off into a lot of stuff, but it was kind of like an engineered sort of thing. And so, because for a lot of people that don't know, and again, I know that you weren't counting on me like responding with this, but a lot of people that don't know, Jim Morrison was part of this kind of Laurel Canyon group in the 60s that if you really start looking into it, these guys were, these musicians were all kids of high up CIA operatives. And so like his dad was an admiral in the Navy, and he sort of had a lot of things to do with like the Gulf of Tonkin, which inevitably, kicked off the Vietnam War. So there's a lot of like kind of stuff with that. I kind of think though that, you look at Morrison at the height of his stardom and he is sort of the iconic rock star, I guess, if you would look at. But, at the end, he kind of went through sort of an Elvis phase and he got really fat. And I think there could definitely be something with, with him being, not really dead. And I think there's a possibility that Elvis kind of did the same thing.
Man, it's super interesting. I mean, especially, it would have been a lot easier in a way to kind of fake. Like if a pop star was like, you know what, I've just had it, and this isn't really what I want, and I'm bored with this. I'm just going to kind of disappear. You guys can create whatever story you want.
Yeah,
I think it would have been. Yeah, I think it would have been much easier to do that back then, when everybody's not, taking pictures all the time of everything.
Yeah,
and so that is what makes it more plausible for sure. Man, there's so many of these that I want to keep getting into, but before we do.
We will return after these messages.
Tyler, man, there's one thing that got me through this COVID craziness. I got in the mail a couple of items from our merch store. And I got to tell you, man, this crew neck sweater is maybe one of the most comfortable things I've ever worn. The inside of it is like, I don't know how to explain it, man. I'm never going to take this thing off.
Wait a minute, we have sweaters?
I mean, you know what I'm saying, sweatshirts. This sweatshirt is the most comfortable thing I have ever put on. I also got this like really cool trucker cap that says BE RAD on it. I mean, I think if people haven't already, they need to go check out our merchandise store. They can find it at shop.spreadshirt.com/thatwouldberad. So again, that's shop.spreadshirt.com/thatwouldberad.
America's future can be determined by our dreams and our visions.
It was very intense, bright light.
For over
200 years, there have been reports of giant man-like creatures.
From another dimension, another world, I don't know.
The most intriguing mystery on the North American continent.
You're listening to That Would Be Rad.
Now, moving away from like the 27 Club for just a second, this one I had never heard of, and apparently, I guess, has taken the internet by storm maybe like almost 20 years ago now, which is kind of weird to think about, but kind of close to that Paul is dead theme. I didn't know that there was a conspiracy about Avril Lavigne.
Oh, yeah, that she's a clone.
Yeah, that she's like this clone, and apparently like around 2003 or so, allegedly, she was replaced by someone named Melissa Vandella because allegedly after Avril Lavigne's grandfather died, she was super depressed and being fed up with the celebrity lifestyle kind of ended up kind of taking her own life, allegedly.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so there is this fan page, I guess, that originated in Brazil, which is like the I don't know, there's just all kinds of stuff that happens in Brazil, apparently, like aliens and all this kind of stuff.
Well, and also my favorite artist phenomenon, Raphael Grandpa.
On this fan page, there's all kinds of, quote unquote, evidence that includes Avril Lavigne wearing dresses instead of pants at various award shows, and how her sort of like style has changed in a weird way over the years. And, even...
Which I think, as a true believer, probably more so than yourself, like, to me, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
To me, that's like a little bit of a reach.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, but it's funny because a lot of these, as bizarre as they are, there's a lot of, like, there's this cult following for all of these conspiracy theories. I mean,
oh, yeah.
And it's funny kind of like talking about it now and like with kind of what's going on, I would say this week, last week or whatever, there's that new documentary about Britney Spears. I haven't seen it, but apparently, it's kind of intense with regard to like her father basically taking like legal
the Free Britney
that
movement.
Free Britney movement, and then
it's that's really sad, which if you didn't know, there's also a clone theory with Britney Spears as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And she's, again, this could go off into a huge thing, but like for our listeners who don't know, there's a thing called MK Ultra, which is a sort of government introduced mind control type thing. I think it was created by the CIA, and it was at, what is it called? It's called like Ravenwood, I believe, which, that's part of the thing. And then like the Montauk Project. These are all sort of things that actually really happen. I mean, there's real documentation about mind control, and that would later on inspire the Duffer Brothers to create Stranger Things. But yeah, the MK Ultra program, or it's also called Project Monarch. These are things that basically these people are taken in. Well, there's several kind of things. Like one of the theories is basically they're kind of taken in and they're given this sort of ultimatum of, okay, we're going to make you a star, we're going to make you huge, but you have to go along with everything we say. So they give them a handler, they give them, which is like a person who's with them all the time, and then they can do certain like hand movements or say like a certain word or something. And again, it's like all mind control. It's all based on like brainwashing techniques, and I mean, this is all documented stuff from our government. These are programs that they created to use against foreign enemies, basically. And so a lot of people believe that the guy that killed John Lennon was part of MK Ultra program, but Britney Spears was one. And so basically, what they do is they create another persona which basically can handle all the rigors of like celebrity and stuff. So they do all these kind of techniques and to kind of break down your psyche. A lot of it gets pretty dark. I mean, a lot of it can get into like torture and really sort of like sadistic kind of like techniques. So it puts so much strain on a person's psyche or their like personality that as a coping mechanism, the human brain will create an alter personality. And so when they do that, somehow I don't know all the ins and outs of it. A lot of it's like a Clockwork Orange, Stanley Kubrick. I think a lot of the stuff they show in that movie is kind of what they what they do in the real MK Ultra, but they figure out a way that they can do these sort of, the handler can do these sort of like, you know, a hand signal or a gesture or a word or something like a, you know, like a code word basically that like makes the person like split into that altered personality almost. And it's, I mean, it's really dark and you know, again, you can go down to like into crazy altered states. Another funny thing about this is, just as an aside, another guy that was huge in the Laurel Canyon group, you know, with Jim Morrison, is Frank Zappa. And actually, Frank Zappa's dad was a CIA head high up in the CIA who actually worked at Edgewood, which was, you know, where we know that like the MK Ultra, like the mind control program was created.
Wow.
Sorry. That was
yeah,
much.
I mean, I don't know that the documentary is about that, but that is super interesting, man, for sure. I mean,
no, I'm sure it's not.
Of course, there's that 80s movie, Altered States, that kind of, you know, goes into that stuff.
Movie.
It's pretty cool, man. I didn't know about that, interesting about, like, basically her being used as a, you know, an experiment or whatever. Bad news. It looks like her sort of like, I don't know that she handled it or could have handled it, you know, and it's sad. I think this documentary is more along the lines of like how, you know, she was kind of just like wronged in general or whatever.
Yeah, which I think her situation is really, really sad because, another theory with how they sort of create these celebrities or they sort of engineer these things is like, you know, like I said earlier, instead of approaching these celebrities as they're getting big and saying, hey, we can make you a star that'll be an international icon. The other possibility or theory is that they're completely engineered from the beginning. So I've also heard that theory, especially with Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera.
Engineered meaning?
Well, engineered in the sense that they were, instead of like us, you know, we started a band, we started writing songs, we started touring or, you know, playing out, then that moved to touring, then that moved to, you know, and you kind of build this sort of organic, natural momentum. You know, these sort of government agencies, or maybe even sort of like shadow or black sort of, not necessarily like quote unquote government, but like, you know, they approach these people. Britney Spears, for example, she can't really sing. You know, back in the day, she's pretty, she's young, so like let's just approach this girl, because that's another thing that's interesting with the CIA is like they've had a hand long, like in pop culture and sort of the zeitgeist for a long time, like, you know, much earlier than even like Beatles mania and like all that stuff. So apparently, you know, and it's kind of to push this sort of agenda. So the concept that or the theory that Britney Spears was basically kind of plucked out of this Louisiana town. You know, she's just like, oh, she's a dumb redneck who can't sing, but she's pretty and young. So let's take her and let's engineer her into, let's manufacture her basically into this pop star. Let's write all of her songs. You know, she can't sing, but, you know, now we're at the height of using like Pro Tools and Auto-Tune, and we can, you know, we have software that can make her sing.
Oh, yeah.
And it's kind of like they built it, and then, you know, her persona, she collapsed under the pressure of it. And then her dad, especially, who is playing the role of her manager, you know, that's not his export, but like his product. That's how his money's. Yeah,
well,
product,
and you know, like I think
money.
that's partially what the documentary is about. Is more along the lines of how, you know, he took, I forget what his conservatorship, is that what it is? Where he basically has control of all of her money, dude, and has it for the past like 20 years or something. And so she's just held hostage.
And her though. Huh? And her though, it's like
right.
She can't even do anything.
Yeah, she can't go anywhere. She can't do anything. And you know, I think the poor girl, you know, needs some help in terms of mental health and stuff, and it's just unfortunate. I mean, I don't know if the CIA, you know, is to, I would say, credit or blame for that whole like early 2000s pop music stuff, but most of it all was actually certainly manufactured. All the songs were written by the same songwriting team, and then that kind of trickled into, and still does, especially since nobody really pays attention to liner notes anymore because everybody buys or listens to their songs online. You know, you don't really know who's writing these songs, but we know of a lot of songwriting teams, people that we knew back in the day, people that have since moved to Nashville, that kind of thing, that essentially just write for all of them. So the radio, when you turn it on, you're listening to sort of newer pop music or even like country songs and stuff like that. It's all being written. It's just sung by different people, but it's all being written by sort of the same group of songwriting individuals and stuff. So
yeah, that and that, sorry to cut you off, but that's an interesting thing too, because Nashville, since I think like the mid to early 90s, it's like what you're saying is like the same 12 people have literally written 95% of any song on the radio.
Yep.
Which is insane.
Yeah. And that's why, like, when certain artists, look, I don't really listen to country basically at all, but when certain artists come out, that it's just immediately evident that these people are, like, real. They write their own songs, and you can hear it in their lyrics. You can hear it in the way that they sing.
Like Stephen Wilson Jr.
Stephen Wilson Jr., Tyler Childers, I think is his name. Like, that stuff is the real deal. And that, you know, when that happens, it's like good music and good songwriting is relatively universal, whether it's hip-hop or R&B or country music or rock and roll. If it's a good songwriter, then you can hear it despite what your favorite genre is, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of more sort of like quick ones because we're getting a little long in the tooth here. Some of these that are just so bizarre, you know, a lot of them, I'll kind of skip through some that I think people may have heard. You know, there's mystery surrounding Jimi Hendrix's death, and there might have been some CIA involvement and some sort of greed in regards to like a life insurance policy on him and all kinds of stuff.
Well, and also his manager was actually previously in MI6, which is basically the British CIA.
So there's stuff like that.
It's all tied together, man.
Exactly. But this one kind of, like, I love those, but I also love the ones that are just so weird that it's just hilarious. So there's one, I've never heard this before, that John Lennon was killed by Stephen King.
What?
Like, as in the author, Stephen King.
I've never heard of this.
Yeah.
And I'm usually up on all this stuff, but this is one that I've never heard of.
So yeah, the funny thing is, it's so ridiculous that you're like, well, why? I don't, you know, it's clearly Mark David Chapman, the guy that shot him on that fateful day.
I never can remember his name.
Yeah, it's always that weird, like, sort of like, you know, it's hard.
Like
three name people, man. It's just like immediately, if you ever meet somebody like that, you might want to, you know, find the exit. So,
which by the way, sorry to cut you off, and you actually may eventually get into this, but you said Stephen David Chapman?
Mark David Chapman.
There it is. Yeah, Mark David Chapman was, like I said previous, you know, there's a lot of sort of evidence that links him to being a member of like the MK Ultra program or Project Monarch. And he was found with the famous American classic, The Catcher in the Rye, which was written by J.D. Salinger. But apparently that was his, God, why can I not think of what it's called? That was his, it's not like code word. It's like, you know, and like La Femme Nikita and like...
Yeah. Like,
like their like activation, whatever the thing was that basically makes them...
Whatever their...
click into...
Yeah, a trigger word.
Trigger, trigger, that's it. And so, yeah, he was kind of, you know, there's a lot of conspiracy theories about that as well.
Man, it's so funny, and not to bring it back to Columbo, but I literally just watched an episode of Columbo where this kind of happened. There's this psychology professor, and he used sort of, he taught all these students about like trigger words and like being able to control your emotions and stuff by having like your own personal like secret word and all this kind of stuff. Well, anyway, in the episode, he ends up killing a colleague so that, you know, he can get further and write a book. I don't remember why. Like I said before, I kind of fast forward through the murder and just watched when Columbo gets on the scene. But he had trained his dogs, these two Doberman pinschers, that whenever he said a certain word, they would like kill somebody. Well, Columbo figures that out, and at the very end of the episode, Columbo kind of sets him up to where, you know, in order to kind of incriminate him officially, the dogs are present, and the psych professor basically uses that word, and all of a sudden the dogs like jump on Columbo and they just start licking him. And so Columbo basically tells him that he reprogrammed them for that word so that they would like kiss instead of kill kind of thing. And then it was just like this whole thing. But it's so weird that literally we're talking about this and I just watched an episode. See, Columbo, you know, I got to tell you, It's the best show ever, man.
Yeah. What are you watching it on, by the way?
What am I watching it on?
Like, where do you stream it from?
YouTube TV. So it comes
yeah.
on some random channel. I don't even know. And so it just, with YouTube TV, you can kind of program it to kind of like an old VCR record whenever it's on.
Which actually, I hated YouTube TV at first, but my buddy Obe gave me the, an additional login. So
We don't.
cool. May not be legal. Anywho,
Going back to the Stephen King thing, apparently it's like very loose. Like, it doesn't really hold a lot of water. This guy named Steve Lightfoot in 2009, somewhere in, I think, Sarasota City or something, in a town council meeting, basically announced that the real culprit of the murder of John Lennon was none other than Stephen King. He talks about how the FBI and Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon sanctioned the murder because they didn't like Lennon's anti-war cause and all this kind of stuff. That also, like, Chapman and Stephen King kind of looked similar back then. I don't know. Anyway, I read that and I was like, that's weird.
I mean, boy, that is a reach. But
Well, listen to
I do think that's why he was killed, though. I think that is
I don't know.
dead on.
There's something going on there. All right, so here's another just like completely bizarre and almost easily dismissible, but it's like whenever they're this bizarre, it's like you can't dismiss it, because why in the world would anybody think this?
Yeah, those are the best, actually.
This one is Rivers Cuomo, from the frontman from Weezer, is actually Kurt Cobain.
Yeah, you mentioned this to me briefly like a week ago, and I was so intrigued with this.
So basically, the theory goes, Kurt Cobain faked his suicide, completely revamped his look, got cleaned up, kind of devoted himself to the facade. But even timeline-wise, I don't understand how that works out, because, well, I guess like the Blue Album came out in '94.
Well, wait. When did Kurt Cobain die?
Kurt Cobain, quote unquote, allegedly died April of 1994. You ready for this?
Okay.
The Weezer Blue Album is released May 10th, 1994. Now, that's a lot of work, very quickly to transform your look from Kurt Cobain to Rivers Cuomo. They don't even kind of look close in terms of looks go. But, I guess to make it a little bit weirder, Weezer performed a full set of Nirvana in 1998. So, I don't know.
Wow.
Kind of weird.
I'm a huge Weezer fan, but from after Pinkerton on, I have absolutely zero interest in that band. But the Blue Album is probably in my top 5 of all time.
Yeah, definitely. Me too, man. Blue Album, Pinkerton, those two, so good. I mean, there's still, I can't lie, I still love certain songs and stuff from other records, but I get it. I mean, it's a little corny.
Yeah. And honestly, I think I just thought of this. I think part of the reason that I have such a hard time with getting into Weezer is I know how good they can be, because the Blue Album was so good and then Pinkerton was so cool.
Yeah.
It's just like everything else is just so
you got to
cheesy.
think about it this way too, man. In a way, kind of going back to what we talked about, where when you're in a band for so long, I mean, think about it, dude. So, I think Rivers Cuomo is probably close to 50 now, and he's singing about how, you just can't.
It's cheesy,
yeah, man. It's kind of tough.
Although one thing that I being a songwriter myself and ourselves, one thing that I don't know, there's an element of this that I like, and then there's another thing artistically that I don't like about this, but apparently I've heard that he is such a sort of an audiophile and obsessed with music that he has these binders of songs. So basically he would have, a binder of all hit pop songs, that are in the key of, a certain key, and another binder of songs that are in a 3/4 or a 4/4 signature. And so all these songs that he's writing are kind of created from this template that's already been sort of done. So it's this is a guaranteed, hit song that was top 40 for 20 weeks or something.
Yeah.
So let's take this exact template. Let's keep the key. Let's keep the chord structure. We'll take the melody from this other song that was another top 40 pop song, obscure one-hit wonder in the 80s. We'll take that melody. We'll put it on top of this. And then we're guaranteed to have like a hit song. And so I think a lot of it, could be that they're kind of like engineered, they're kind of, which, I kind of like that, but I kind of hate it.
I remember hearing that sort of rumor when he went to Harvard that he studied and kind of became obsessed with figuring out the pop song formula.
Right. But it was like not necessarily like the rock and roll formula, but like it could be the cheesiest pop song,
Which
he wanted to figure out like the trick to writing that song.
Yeah. Well, kind of one of the other ones that we kind of talked about, but I think it would be kind of fun to kind of dive deeper into this one and see how much information we can find is Robert Johnson. We kind of talked about him earlier and being in the
Crossroads.
27 Club, and people may remember that Ralph Macchio movie. I think it's called Crossroads, actually.
It is called Crossroads.
It's kind of loosely sort of based on this kind of idea where, Robert Johnson, I mean, he's like a Delta blues Mississippi legend, right? This is a young man that just kind of came out of nowhere and was just like this phenomenon, really. And so allegedly, and I would just be so interested to figure out where this kind of lore originated from,
Well, I can tell you actually.
Okay.
Well,
let me just say this. Let me just say this. So basically, allegedly, Robert Johnson came to a crossroad where he is said to have taken his guitar, midnight or something. The timing kind of varies a little bit from story to story, but basically he went there, allegedly kind of sold or made a deal with the devil in exchange for mastering sort of the blues guitar. Now, apparently before he was just this like blues guitar maestro, he was actually better at harmonica. And then so he just wasn't even good at all at guitar. And so all of a sudden, just in a matter of a few weeks, he just reemerges with this just, again, like I said, talent that is just going to span the time of history. He will forever be known as like one of the greatest blues guitarists ever.
Well, and not even that, but I think it's important to put into context that so basically he was known throughout this town or known throughout the area for being a really lackluster musician, not a great songwriter. And honestly, like at the time, the blues, I guess it was in a much more primitive sort of state where it didn't sound like what we think of now as like the blues. So especially like the Delta blues, that's where, and like the Mississippi Delta, that's where Robert Johnson was from. And so, when we say like the Delta blues or like that style, I mean, he completely created that. And so terrible songwriter. I didn't know about the harmonica thing. That's interesting, but not a good, guitar player or songwriter. But apparently he disappeared for, I think, several weeks or like several months. Do you know that?
No, I think what I read was it was just like a couple weeks, and he just kind of reemerged, and everybody was like, "What in the world?"
Yeah, he came back, and they said that he had the confidence of like an 80-year-old, badass blues guitarist, and basically that blues, that pentatonic scale chord structure would eventually go on to create rock and roll, create everything that we know.
Well, and it spawned so many.
I mean, we would not have rock and roll now. It would sound different. It would look different than if we didn't have Robert Johnson. So the interesting thing to that, and especially if you look at it as like the sort of like, especially in the old days, like the Bible thumping kind of like ultra conservatives, rock and roll is the devil's music. Well, if you look at it that way, and the concept that, okay, Robert Johnson made a deal with the devil at the Crossroads, which are sort of a classic liminal state in the paranormal and supernatural sort of folklore, came back, total badass, amazing songwriter, this totally innovative character that was making this music that no one had ever heard before. And you really should check it out, Woody, if you haven't listened to it in a long time. My buddy Jesse, I'd always been fascinated with his story, but I was hanging out with him years ago at his tattoo shop, Jesse Phillips, and he was playing it, and it's like, you know, you think you kind of know what the blues are, but it's this really bizarre like style of like this weird like finger picking guitar thing, and it's like his voice and the guitar are kind of like one sort of moving kind of instrument kind of thing. It's really, really bizarre. And the thing too is like which this makes sense with him dying at 27, which I didn't realize. But you know, there were only so many songs that he even had recorded, and I think a lot of them were lost and then kind of sort of rediscovered years later, and a bunch of stuff like that. But everything that we know as like that would move on to like being like the blues and rock and roll, every bit of that is linked to Robert Johnson. And so if you look at it as like, oh, well, rock and roll is the devil's music, well then him making a deal with the
Technically, they
devil,
might be right, even though they
could be dead on. Yeah,
yeah. So I think that one definitely deserves, you know, a deeper dive there.
Yeah, that's a good one. By the way, shout out to Steve Vai. He was the other like bad guy guitar shredder on Crossroads.
The movie?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Man, I got to go back and watch that.
Yeah, I remember it being cool, but I feel like it
Might not.
may not
Might
stand
get
up.
the old Kroll stamp.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of that, man, we haven't really. Boy, we've kind of slacked off on the.
Yeah, I know. Going to Disney has really messed me up.
Well, yeah,
And I
but I mean,
apologize.
well worth it though. Family time.
Yeah.
You know, and all that. So I promise we're going to get to the Fantasy Face-Off because we have to. And I've got all these VHS movies that I just cannot wait to start watching. But we just have to kind of readjust the lineup so that they're fairly, the battles are, I guess, fairly matched or whatever.
Yeah, but us not really being sports, well, especially me not really caring about sports at all beyond the, you know, 90s Bulls.
Right.
The bracket system
That we created
was
just completely not right.
Not right at all.
A shout out to our buddy Jeremy who
Exactly.
kind of gave us a heads up because he's a humongous basketball fan. And truthfully, like, you and I, what a bunch of knuckleheads. We didn't even think to say, hey, man, we're wanting to create. I mean, God. Anyways, next time he's going to be
How
like
does the bracket system
Yeah,
work?
I don't know. He's going to be in charge of it. He's our sports. What am I looking for here? Sports, not commentator, but sports expert, but sports
God, what is the word? I know exactly what you're talking about. Sports
consultant.
consultant.
Is that
I
right?
mean, it could be.
We're already
he
messing
would be a
that up. So
consultant.
anyway, he's going to be in charge of helping us out with brackets and stuff like that in the future. Look, there's a lot of there's so many random ones, dude. Like that's kind of what was extremely intriguing to me was I knew a lot of them. I knew the Paul McCartney thing. I knew the 27 Club. I knew the Robert Johnson. But when you start, when the things that popped out to me were, hey man, Stephen King killed John Lennon. Excuse me? Or, hey man, Kurt Cobain changed his identity to Rivers Cuomo. You know, those kind of things made me think, gosh, I really think we should talk about that today. So,
oh, it's amazing. Yeah, yeah. Which I do think that a lot of these do deserve like they're a full episode. Like honestly, I know I kind of rambled there for a minute, but like the Laurel Canyon
that connection is very interesting to me.
It's wild. I mean, just knowing that, like, I mean, you have Jim Morrison, Frank Zappa, David Crosby. I think somebody else in Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young.
I know
John Phillips from the Mamas and the Papas.
I know the dudes from the band America were all kind of like military kids. I don't know if they were involved
America,
in
the Byrds, Graham Parsons, Neil Young. All these people were kids of CIA operatives, and the sort of the theory is that like, hey, we're going to create this like 60s hippie movement. Ultimately, it was just like a psyop. And I didn't realize this, but like, you know, I read recently that like the CIA had its hand in before sort of mainstream music was kind of a thing really, you know, the CIA had its hand in like art, like the art world and like boosting these artists for like, because this artist would sort of push this like political narrative. So we're going to push a bunch of money and like buy all his pieces and make him blow up so everybody listens to him. And it's like, it's little things like that, and sort of the theory behind it, as far as the Laurel Canyon stuff in the 60s, is that all these musicians were creating this movement of music, and it was basically like, hey, listen to,
Makes you wonder if there's like anything subliminal in there,
Oh, well, I mean, and then you can get into like what's called backmasking and, playing your records backwards.
There's some of that in like, I think some old Judas Priest type stuff and
a
lot of metal stuff.
Back to
Metallica.
Led Zeppelin's a huge, I think that was one of the first big ones. The idea that like the CIA is sort of pushing these musicians for, which may not be like good things per se. It's really interesting. Same with the Beatles. That was, this is another theory that they were completely put together, completely engineered by this thing called the Tavistock Institute, which is sort of this really bizarre, like social group of ultra wealthy people who are kind of, if you know anything about like George Soros, it's like they kind of push this like narrative of like social movements, and so that's another idea that they were completely put together to ultimately kind of, manipulate, American youth.
Well,
so there's a lot of really interesting stuff.
I think they manipulated it in a good way, if you ask me, because long live the Beatles.
Yeah, I agree.
Although, well, that's another.
Both Pauls.
Yeah, both of them.
We love them both.
So I think out of this, some of these legends, I think they deserve their own sort of, if not own episode, maybe like a combo of just like some of those that we need to dive deeper into. But overall, I think it's fair to say that, look, at the end of the day, we're humongous fans of music. I literally make a playlist for almost every activity, including like, what am I going to listen to in the shower today? What am I going to listen to on the way up to my office? Or what am I going to listen to on the way up to the grocery store? Or whatever it is.
And you've done that since I've known you, since the first time I met you. You were making mixtapes
and mix CDs, so that, and like just everything, man.
Yeah, it like you would show up and like the highlight. Well, first off, you would typically be late because you're like
no.
burning.
Hold on a second.
No. I was late all the time too. But
I don't think I was ever late.
Well, there were a lot of times that you were late because
punctuality.
Punctuality Brown.
Go ahead.
No, but you would have you would create this entire like mix CD of all these songs that like some songs that we love, some songs that like you knew that I would be into that I hadn't heard yet, and I mean we have been massive audiophile, obsessed music fans for years and years.
Yeah.
So anytime we can talk about this stuff, I'm a huge. Yeah. I'm always in.
Yeah, man. Well, dude.
Also, all you folks out there, if you know of any cool conspiracies related to pop culture or the music world, especially the ones that may not be widely known about, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, for sure, man. And I wouldn't limit it to, like you said, kind of not limited to music, but like, actors, actresses, movies, those kind of things. I love hearing about that. And especially, like Tyler said, the ones that aren't sort of forefront in everybody's mind, the more weird, the better, really.
Yeah.
Look, thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you guys so much for like interacting with us. I think really, truthfully, the best place to kind of hang out with us, interact with us, ask us questions, talk back and forth really is our Instagram page. You can always, shoot us an email as well at thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com, especially if you have interesting things that you want us to cover on the show. Also, man, thank you to everyone that is buying our merchandise in our store because, gosh, it is just awesome to think about folks all across the country and the world, for that matter, supporting us and representing our podcast. It's interesting, there's kind of been an array, because we have so many designs, there's kind of been an array of different things that people have bought. But I'm going to post, or we're going to post later this week, some of the top sellers that are just kind of flying off the shelves, so to speak, right now. So,
again, sorry for like the rambling, but I personally have missed being behind the mic and just being able to just ramble on with my best friend for, it's been 3 weeks or more since Disney, and I'm just so happy to be back. You know, thank you guys so much coming back week after week. Without you, we probably would make the podcast, but it would just be for the sake of posterity for our kids to listen to. But, you know, you guys make it fun and worth doing. Totally make all the work that goes into these things, you know, worth it. So we appreciate you. We thank you. And as always,
Be rad.
That's the way it goes. Clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead before you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers.